Universal Studios recently invited me here onto the back lot to visit a certain towering structure on the hill, that which has become world famous as the house that Psycho built. My journey to this weird off-the-beaten-path Gothic mansion was part of the studio's publicity for the forthcoming release on Friday, June the 3rd of Psycho 2, a sequel to Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 classic of the macabre. Come on, let's stroll casually up to the house together and find out what makes Norman Bates tick like a time bomb. First, let's meet Psycho 2 director Richard Franklin, a young Australian whose previous work was Patrick, a 1978 film about a catatonic, and Road Games, a little-seen horror film starring Jamie Lee Curtis. Now, Franklin first met Hitchcock in 1967 while he was a student at USC, and they became good friends, with the seasoned vet imparting certain philosophies to the young Franklin. Now, ironically, 16 years later, Franklin has shaped Psycho 2 to keep the spirit and legacy of Hitchcock alive and living in Hollywood.
Wouldn't it be better if you put her someplace?
You mean an institution? A madhouse? People always call a madhouse someplace, don't they? Put her in someplace.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to sound uncaring.
What do you know about caring? Have you ever seen the inside of one of those places? The laughing and the tears, and the cruel eyes studying you. My mother there. But she's harmless. She's as harmless as one of those stuffed birds.
Richard, how did you approach the problem of doing a sequel about an acknowledged masterpiece?
Well, interestingly, of course, at the time Psycho was released, it wasn't acknowledged as a masterpiece. So one of the tough things is that people who now either misremember the film or who've reassessed it have decided that in the interim. We, first of all, decided we had to have a self-sufficient story because we knew there'd be some people out there who haven't seen the original, not many, but we had to have a self-sufficient story about Norman Bates as he is now. It could have been anyone, but I think it resonated with a lot more interesting things, that it was a character that we knew 22 years ago. Then, of course, it was a matter of trying to make a film that was faithful to the feeling and the tone of the original, which was the major difficulty. It was just defining what that tone was, because it's not just a horror film and it's not just a black comedy, as some people now like to think of it.
Your visual faithfulness to the original film is there too. There's a lot of scenes that obviously were inspired by the original. There's one or two that are duplicated for obvious reasons.
Yes, well, for ironic reason. I didn't duplicate for the sake of just copying. I think when people see the story and think about it, they'll realize that the reasons we've used certain shots again, or sequences of shots, is for a sort of ironic, almost tongue-in-cheek purpose. Tony Perkins, for example, walks through a series of shots that Vera Miles walked through in the original. But it was difficult to get on those reconstructed sets using a lot of the original materials. The house, of course, was the same house, and not be conscious of Hitchcock's camera angles. He was the master of film technique, and where he put the camera was generally the best place to put it.
What standards did you set for the blood and violence in your film?
Well, that was one of the difficulties in terms of the misremembrance of Psycho, and I went back to the original reviews of Psycho and to a series of letters to the editor of the New York Times in 1960, which were, people were split. Some people thought that the picture was gruesome, horrific, the most horrifying thing they'd ever seen, and some thought it was the model of restraint. Nowadays, most people think of the film as restrained, but we felt it wouldn't have been faithful to the original if there weren't a few moments in our picture that will shock a modern audience, as the original did.
You went through all of the original footage from the shower sequence, and you found one scene that Hitchcock had not used.
There were a couple of shots that that had been extended. There was only one shot ever done that wasn't used at all, and we decided not to recut the sequence, but we went back to the original negative, and the version of the original shower murder that opens our film is the most complete, well, it is the complete version, and there are many others around now, so people can see it as it was.
You knew Hitchcock personally when you were a film student at USC. You invited him to the campus, and you more or less got to know him. What are your memories of Hitchcock from that period?
Hitchcock was a shy, self-effacing man. He was eager to share his knowledge of film. He didn't quite understand why other people didn't make films the way he did, and he felt that the way he made films was a tradition that went back to the silent era. So I think, in a way, the fact that we're continuing on the tradition of what he called pure cinema, which is not just to do with thrillers, it's to do with the way you tell a story with a camera, not relying on dialogue, as of course they didn't in the silent era. I think he would like what we've done here.
How should movie suspense be manipulated?
Movie suspense comes from one thing only. It comes from good storytelling, and it comes from what he would call putting the bomb under the table. To surprise people by having the two of us sit here and blow up is a momentary visceral shock thing. But if we suddenly now discover that there's a bomb inside this, and we cut to it and we see the wick burning, the fuse on the bomb burning, then we have suspense.
Hitchcock told the press after the film came out that never did the knife touch the body.
He was lying.
He was lying.
He was lying. He was lying because if he admitted that it touched the body, they would have cut the shot. He also claimed when somebody said, but we saw some nudity in there, he said, yes, well, that's where I was clever. You see, I used a young boy as a stand-in. He didn't.
He used
a female stand-in, and there is nudity, and the knife does touch the body. I hate to destroy the legend, but in a way, that's what's even more interesting about him, was that he was able to overcome reality with his public persona.